And then I left my body. I went back to source and directly so straight through to the light. But everything that was real, that we had the frequency of love,
Mhm.
was bright and glowing, and everything that was absent of it was grayscale.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of The Soul Inspired. Today we have Ritchie Moore with us. He is someone who's had a near-death experience, so we'll be chatting about that today. He's also a psychotherapist, but somewhat identifies as well as an energy healer now because of his near-death experience. So we're going to dig into that. So first of all, Ritchie, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you being here, and I've been
Thank you.
really interested hearing about how you've gotten to where you are. I haven't got too much info from you yet, but I generally start by asking a little bit about who you were growing up, because a lot
Mhm.
of times that can shift when you have an experience like a near death or
Yeah.
a spiritual experience. So I'm just curious if you can give me a little bit of information of who Richie was growing up and your maybe your belief systems, that type of stuff.
Yeah, well, I guess I was a bit of a boring child, to be honest. I wasn't into to popular culture and all that. I was absolutely obsessed with science and nature, and animals specifically. So I kind of grew up way more interested in anything that was natural than anything that would be on the TV, for example, or music, etc. So I'm not very good at quoting, when songs were or favorite songs. I've heard them, but I just wasn't paying attention at the time. And in the same way, I wasn't interested in playing or games. I was quite sensible, really. I wanted to be outside all the time, and that's where I spent most of my time. I fell in love with horses, and that was my real sort of hobby and passion was riding and caring for horses. And that was the majority of my childhood, if not all of it, really, to be quite frank. So yeah, quite connected to nature, but not much else.
Not all kids are just thinking about what they're going to do out in nature. So I wouldn't say
Yeah,
that's quite boring. It's almost like you had an innate, you already were attentive to what nature is around you and things like that at a young age. So that's
yeah,
kind of different because not every, I mean, I was jumping around in forts and stuff, but I wasn't really looking
yeah,
amongst the trees and enjoying nature and stuff like that when I was a kid. That's just me, but
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I think it came with just a real thirst for knowledge and understanding, And if I wasn't out doing something with animals or nature, then I wanted to talk to adults. I really wasn't interested in children, to be honest, because they couldn't teach me anything. So it was like I want to sit with the adults all the time. So a lot of my childhood was being told to go and play with the children, And I was like, no, I
Hmm.
want to listen to the adults. They can teach me
Yeah.
something, show me, teach
Yeah.
me.
So you were just kind of, but you didn't have anything extraordinary going on. You were just kind of living your life, and you had, did you have a belief system in the spirit realm or anything like that, or were you just kind of going?
I mean, I suppose I was raised Christian, and I went to, a Christian school, and well, attended church through the whole, the scouts. I was quite into the scouts. I love going camping out and learning stuff through the scouts. So we went to the church via that. And I quite like singing, so I was in the choir before I realized it was pretty uncool, and then I stopped. But yeah, so I guess there was a little shape there, but I wouldn't call myself in any way a good Christian or a strong believer. I was quite the opposite. I'd be the one that's going, why? That doesn't make sense to me. Can you
Mm,
explain that, please? That doesn't quite add. And those are the questions. I was always very inquisitive as a child, but they were the questions that people don't like to answer, and or they don't like to be questioned about. So it was a bit of a dead end for me. Whereas other questions, people would be like, "Oh, he's interested," and they'd talk about it. But when I questioned religion or somebody else's belief systems, then obviously that sort of met a bit of a blank. So I didn't push too hard because I was just like, well, I'm not getting answers, so why bother? So there was a little shaping there, I suppose, but not one that I adopted freely. It was more of a questioning sort of element. And I suppose I had quite a spiritual interest because, I mean, in hindsight, I understand this now as what I'd call my spirituality, because I could see it in nature. I didn't
Mm.
understand it as such, but I think my spiritual needs, let's say, as a child were being met through nature rather than religion. So I think that shaped me a little bit more than a belief system, shall we say.
At some point you got into psychotherapy. Did you do that?
Yeah.
This was that before the experience happened? Were you already kind of moving in that direction before you had any experiences?
Yeah, no, way before. Unfortunately, I think there were many traumatic events during childhood um, that weren't necessarily direct, but tragic loss in the family, etc. So from a very young age, I was acutely aware of trauma, etc. And growing up, I think I was fully aware of this, and I think my pursuit for knowledge was like, I need to do something about this. How do I do this? And that kind of, as most psychotherapists will admit, we go into it because really we need the healing ourselves, and I think that was the pursuit. And there's still a lot of stigma back then, and my pursuit of knowledge was under the guise of, oh, this is really interesting, but actually it was stuff that I needed to sort out for myself, and I did a lot of that by learning about psychology and following that process of learning and understanding. And then it sort of flipped when I made dramatic changes to my own past and healed my own trauma. And I was like, oh, I can't keep this to myself. I want to share this,
Right,
and
right.
that's when it got exciting in a career perspective. But it was never planned, intended. I never had that, childhood dream of thinking I'll do this or that. It was just that, wow, these are powerful resources, and people have been through worse than I have that could benefit from this. So that kind of spurred me on, and trauma became my specialist field. It was how to heal from trauma and the effects of that. So it kind of just took its own natural path, really, without me fully intending it, I suppose. But you could
Well,
argue that it's obviously meant to be.
I like how you said, a lot of psychotherapists will say they kind of healed themselves through the process of learning it. I also, again, this is keep having these same things with you, but before I was a musician, I was taking social work. So
Mm.
I was becoming a social worker.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, the same type of thing, I went through a lot of trauma growing up too, with different things. And so, but what I found was, I don't know if it's the empath in me or the sensitivities in me. Once I get into the actual work, it was a little difficult for me to handle at first, especially at a young age. Just
Mm.
hearing other people's stories, I'd go home with it and
Yeah.
relish in it, and it was difficult at first. So I think that's why I kind of moved away from it. I'm more into that kind
Mm.
of stuff now, but when I was young, when I was
Yeah.
like 19, 20, I was like, no, like I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Yeah, no, that totally resonates because, I am extremely sensitive and empathic, and it's been a blessing and a curse. And I think a lot of the accumulated trauma that wasn't directly to me was because of being on the edge of those experiences and watching other people go through it. And I think I collected that. And I think a pivotal moment in my life was understanding how to separate myself from that and how
Mm,
to protect myself from that. But even when I started working as a psychotherapist, I hadn't got a handle on that at
yeah,
all. I was picking up crap all over the place. It was,
right.
yeah. And I used to just think it was me. I'm broken,
Hmm.
and but that spurred me on again in the direction of like, well, okay, what is it then? Until I came to the conclusion that, whoa, hang on, a lot of this isn't actually mine.
I know that some people probably find it more difficult than others to
Yeah,
go in that direction in psychotherapy and psychology, and
sure.
so I commend you for that. Did
Thank
that
you.
did that lead up to this, like this near death experience? Like how did that start to kind of come into your life?
To be honest, yeah, I suppose part of it was that because I wasn't really taking good care of myself in the process. I've always been on the caring side, and I like to look after animals. Part of the process, my partner and I started fostering children who obviously had got lots of troubles, and I think my illness, if you like, really came to a head when I wasn't really taking care of myself. I was taking care of everything but, it was, two children, three horses, four dogs, six chickens. Everything
Wow.
got fed before me, everything got looked after, but even though I was teaching this stuff to other people, I was really not putting myself at the forefront of that. And I think even through the psychotherapy, my drive was to help people more so. And I think that's why it caught up with me. It's as we call it, compassion fatigue, because
Hmm.
you listen to that stuff all the time, but the drive really was just to be helping people. But it catches up with you. I don't think anybody's immune to it. We've all got different levels of resilience, but
Hmm.
we absorb like a sponge, and a sponge can only hold so much, and then it starts to things start to go a little bit wrong. But
Yeah.
again, I didn't listen to the early warning signs. I trojaned on, and that's where it got serious. You know,
So yeah, I find that interesting because you're right, because we're talking burnout and all these things that can happen when you start taking care of others and not taking care of yourself. So what was it that you were faced with?
it started simply as getting a bit of a stomach complaint,
Mm,
um, which intuitively I knew was a stomach ulcer. So I
okay.
pursued that down the medical route. But I didn't have a very well, I wouldn't say unsympathetic doctor, but what I'd say a doctor that said, well, on paper, you're eating well, you're exercising, you're looking well. I was vegan, I was running, swimming, going to the gym regularly, I do yoga, meditation. So on paper, it was like, you're too young, don't worry about it.
Hmm.
Um, but I think, but I wasn't getting better. I was having all these stomach pains and so forth. So we followed a couple of other lines of inquiry, which came to nothing. And then I had I think endoscope, you call it, down into the stomach. And that confirmed that I did indeed have a stomach ulcer, which, it's probably pretty common knowledge. This can be caused by excessive stress,
Hmm.
which is, what I put myself under really. And when I got that confirmation, unfortunately, it wasn't as simple as that. And I was dragged into the consult, well, metaphorically, taken into the consultant, who wouldn't tell me the result. He said, but I need you to see somebody else. And I was taken immediately to a hematologist and told that I had a rare form of lymphoma,
Mm.
um, from, well, stomach cancer, but it was a very rare lymphoma that was rare and aggressive and needed immediate treatment.
Wow.
And without such, he said I'd probably have about 5 weeks to live.
Wow. Wow.
So that was a
I
bit of
I
an
didn't
eye opener.
expect that. I didn't expect that. That's quite a moment to face.
Yeah,
Um, wow. See, that's what I mean. The empath in me right away, I felt that.
yeah,
So you were told this was worse than it was, and you didn't have much time, and you were
yeah,
faced kind of with your own existence, I guess, and you
yeah,
had to go and speak with this specialist. So I'm assuming why we're talking today, because you had an experience type thing. So
yeah.
how bad did this get, and how did it lead up to the near death experience?
Well, I didn't follow the conventional path. I kind of, as traumatic as that sounds, the experience was, I don't know, bizarre. I think my partner said he wished he'd have recorded it because I went somewhere else, and I
Hmm.
was like, right, okay, tell me factually, can we cut it out? What are the options? And he was like, no, there's only one way. It's this intensive chemotherapy where they virtually take you to the brink of death and hope that they kill all the cancer cells and hope that you can make it back again. Um, so I said, absolutely not. I said, I'm going to go away and think about this and find a different route. And my consultant wasn't very happy with that. In fact, he was rather angry and quite aggressive about it. And he said, I know the bed's waiting for you. You need immediate treatment or you've got no chance. And I went, no. I said, I'm going home and I'm going to think about it and I'm going to just sit with it and see what comes because I don't feel, first of all, if that is to believe, then I'm I don't want that treatment and die in hospital. I'd rather go home and so be it. I said, but there's no way I'm doing that now. And the suggestion, it was like months of treatment. I'd be in hospital full time. I wasn't allowed out the room. It was purified air. I was in this controlled environment. It was, and I was just like, no, I don't think no. So I went away. And this is where it got a little bit crazy, shall we say. So I went home. Partner and I were standing outside asking, what the do we do,
Yeah.
And I said, I just need a sign from the universe that everything will be okay. And I believe I was very much into alternative medicine, natural eating well, etc. It was all, it all expanded into this realm. And I thought, I just need a sign to know it'll be okay because I believe I've got the resources and I'm surrounded by wonderful people, having worked in the field of therapy, energy healing, diet, nutrition, you name it. And I stood there and said, just need this sign from the universe. And on the watch, it was 2020. And as we said that, we looked up and the biggest shooting star I've ever seen went across the sky. And I went, everything's going to be fine. And that's where the decision was made that there was going to be no aggressive treatment or any risks taken. And I was going to lean in to the universe and be guided. And and hopefully, survive. I knew death was a possibility, and I acknowledged that, but I decided that I was going to live, and I was going to use this to show other people what was possible. I'd read about other people that had, been from that extreme to the other. There's I'm sure most of your listeners, there's many stories about people that have done this. So I was like, well, if it's been done by somebody, then it means it's a possibility. So let's start looking.
Right.
So I went about it. Went back to the hospital the next day and told him, my consultant, again, obviously wasn't very happy about it, and tried everything in his power to scare me into doing what he wanted. And I declined and went about this naturally, which I did quite successfully for 5 months. I used cannabis oil, oxygen therapy, ozone therapy, even various effects to diets and supplements, intravenous vitamin C, everything that I could possibly think would help the situation. And I sustained myself well for those 5 months. I went back regularly to see the consultant, who was baffled that I was still alive and that I wasn't declining. Blood results, everything were very stable. And he kept telling me, he said, I can't work out why your illness is not behaving like the books say. And I said, well, I'll tell you exactly why, because this is what I'm doing. And he wasn't interested.
No, they never are.
Not interested.
No, they're not.
His actual reply was, I explained what I was doing, and he said, yeah, but you can't prove it. And I said, but I'm sitting here and you're telling me that,
right. Right.
And then I just thought for a minute, I thought this is a waste of time. And I said, are you actually interested at all in what's going on for me, And he went, I'm interested in the outcome. I went, oh, you mean whether I live or die? I went, okay. I said, I won't waste my time. I'll talk to people that are interested. And that's where it kind of stayed. And I went about my business and did my thing. But there was a big hole in what I was doing, one major thing I was doing wrong. And that was firstly, well, a few things really. Firstly, I took it on as something else to do. So it became managing my health added to the list of everything else. I didn't stop working because I didn't want to let people down. And in that, I didn't create the space to truly heal. I was sustaining my life without a doubt, but I wasn't really healing. I was keeping it at bay. And I think, the universe gave it me for a reason, because I had some shit to learn. And I was kind of missing that bit. One of the things I was doing for myself was having the amalgam fillings removed from my mouth. And the metal fillings they
Oh,
put in.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
to limit the toxicity in my body.
right.
And I had one. Well, I went to have one removed, and then they said the tooth was bad, and they removed the tooth. But unfortunately, when they removed the tooth, possibly a little bit of mercury poisoning, but also there was an abscess underneath, and that changed everything because my body couldn't handle that on top of everything else.
Right.
And within 3 weeks of having the tooth removed, the abscess got worse. It paralyzed half my face. I became paralyzed from the waist down. I wasn't able to walk anymore. I couldn't eat, and I was on the way out. And if it wasn't for my partner, I wouldn't have been able to take care of myself at all. And it was quite evident that I was extremely sick. Um, and thankfully, um, uh, one of the nurses spoke to me on the phone. He said, "I really need you to come into hospital." He said, "I really want you to think about the rest of your family, and your kids and what's going on here." She said, "Because you're not going to get back from this." And I was still going, "I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. The universe is going back. I'm going to be
Right.
fine." And my partner was very supportive, but in hindsight, that must have been awful for them because people could see that I was extremely sick. So I eventually relented and said, "Look, I'll come into hospital. I just need you to get me out of pain." I said, because I was in extortion amount of pain. And they said, "Well, you need to come in because we need to put you on palliative care." And I got to the hospital and they said I'd probably got about 6 days at best. And they put me on the palliative care just to ease the transition, I suppose, is what their intention was. But I was still convinced and kept really constantly telling the consultant, "I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine." To which he was having none of it. Uh, but I understood. He said, the cancer spread through your brain and your spine. You're paralyzed. He said there isn't any other way. And again, very tenaciously, I was like, "I'm going to be fine. Trust me, it'll all be fine." Because in my mind, I absolutely was fine. You know, every
Mm-hmm.
morning I was waking up, I was doing the affirmation. I have a strong and healthy body. I can walk. I can do this constantly. You know, and my mind wasn't affected. Body, absolutely, but the mind, most definitely not. So he decided to put me in into an MRI scanner to prove me wrong and him right. Is what I believe anyway.
Hmm.
And it was in that MRI scanner where I had the near death experience and left my body.
Couple things I'm just going to mention is the hard part is when there is all these natural approaches and people are healing all over the place naturally, right?
Mm.
I'm
Yeah,
actually whole food plant-based myself for a good reason. I don't even like to say vegan anymore because you can eat terribly as a vegan now. Everything
absolutely.
is made just the same way that all the other
Process.
stuff is made. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's really and that's the way the industries all work. They all do the same thing. I'm sure
yeah.
they love podcasts like mine because we spread the actual truth of what's going on.
Yeah, yeah,
And then yet you
yeah,
see these doctors and the medicine is pushed. That being said, it's kind of like this odd place because there are certain circumstances and certain people that need those medications. And then there are people who want to take charge of their own health. And
yeah,
I believe the system has to get to a point where we allow people to have that belief because it can happen. And then
yeah, yeah,
you know what I mean? And then next thing you know, you have to be a very strong-willed individual to not get fed into it
yeah.
because you're looking up to these doctors. And again,
Mm,
it's not this big disclaimer, and for people that are on things and stuff like that. I mean, you need to make those decisions for yourself, but
absolutely.
that's the whole point. We should be able to make those decisions for ourselves.
Yes.
It's our
Yeah, yeah,
lives, right? So good for you for sticking true to it. But unfortunately, it sounds like as you were healing, um, you weren't completely healing. I like the way you described that. You took it on as another challenge. It's something we have a very similar personality trait. I'm the same way, and I've had to learn to just accept and move through things
yeah,
and allow things to just happen with the knowledge that I know. instead of being like, I've got to prove this and prove this and prove, like, there's no need for
Yeah,
that, right? You do it for
exactly.
yourself. And so it sounds like you were kind of getting there, but then this tooth
Yeah,
related issue happened and you're like, ah, I was moving in the right direction, and then this thing
yeah,
comes in,
yeah,
and that's the problem when your body is ill, right? Nothing
yeah, yeah.
heals the same way. So it led you down
Absolutely.
this whole other place.
Yeah,
And I just wanted to just appreciate the fact that you shared the story so far, and that must have been a lot to go through. It's wild
thank
to look
you.
at you now sitting there and knowing that you were given 6 days point, you were given 5 weeks, one
Yeah,
point to live. Um, and here you are going into an MRI for them to check probably the growth of the cancer and things like that. They were trying to see how things were
yeah.
looking.
I think it was in he want. I didn't believe him, so he wanted to gather some proof.
Right.
You know.
Just so you could
Um,
come to terms with it, I guess, or
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and I was like, I was all for it. You know, I bring on the diagnostics. You know, I never, whilst I didn't do the treatment that he wanted, I never really worked against him. You know, I said, you're my consultant and I consult you. That's fine, but I'm not going to just roll over and do what you say. It's going to be, on my terms. But I think in hindsight, I was too extreme. I was like, no, it's got to be natural, and I was completely shunning that there was any other possibility in the equation.
Mm,
And I think one of the biggest lessons is, when it comes to healing, you've got to heal on all levels.
right.
And if what I was actually doing was creating a ton of resistance around mainstream
Mm,
medical, big
mm,
pharma, etc., and you can't have resistance when you're healing, you know. And this was the
yeah.
thing; it was I was creating a lot of stuff that, whilst I thought in pursuit of health, I was actually resisting a lot of stuff. Not that I necessarily needed to do some of it or any of it, but just the belief system of like, you're going to kill me. This is no good. This is toxic. That
Mm,
just after, that's all. That's resistance. That
yes.
doesn't resistance doesn't heal. It does the opposite. You know.
Wow.
And I think I was put into this extreme because I still wasn't quite getting that at this stage. It was like, no, I was very much a purist. It's all got to be this and it's all got to be that. But in
Which
reality, that didn't work. Right?
which also causes more stress in the body, right? Because you're stressing
Totally.
about who's actually out there to help you and who's not.
Yeah.
So I can completely attest to that. If you're at, I mean, you're on death's doorstep essentially, and in those
Yeah.
instances, sometimes you need medical intervention. That's just what I mean. If you get in a
Yeah.
car accident, you break legs and break things, and like you can't be like, hey, I'm going
Yes.
to go have a smoothie and hopefully everything's going to work out. Because you know what I mean.
Exactly.
We have these
Exactly.
things in place. If you can get a
Yeah.
hold of
Yeah.
things earlier, that's the whole preventative is the way to go, right? But
Yeah.
you weren't in that stage anymore, and so you were kind of being resistant to everything. So you're in this MRI. What maybe you lead up to what happened during this.
Yeah. Well, it's still quite hard to describe, really. But yeah, they put me in the MRI. They told me, you're going to have to could be in there for a long time. We need to do the whole body. You need to keep absolutely still. And I was like, well, that's not a problem. I'm half paralyzed. I'll be fine. But I thought I need to deal with my mind. That's the thing. And I thought, right. So I prepared myself just to drop into meditation so that I could just, you know, get myself centered and just be there as I needed to be. And it was going into this meditation. I was doing a lot of meditation on love, the frequency of love, everything that I loved, everything that it meant to me.
Mm,
And that's kind of my final sort of conscious thought, maybe, or cognitive thought as I went into the MRI. And then I left my body. I I went, I think, through the process of meditation, maybe supported by the magnetism of the MRI. I don't know. I have no way of proving any of it. But I went back to source and directly so straight through to the light, um, and emerged just in this pure white light and frequency of love. And the best way I can describe it is that it was absolutely nothing but light.
mm,
but it contained everything. Every question I'd ever had, I didn't even need to ask anything. It was just in this suspended in this all-encompassing love, knowledge, and bliss. But there was no marked, I wasn't meeting spirits or anything. It was just this suspension of what I now realize is source energy. And from that perspective, I think once I'd settled into that, feeling that way, the power of it, the expanse of it, but also the nothingness of it, I was able to look back. And I think what I understand now to be looking from source energy back to this dimension, if you like, through the dimensions back to this dimension.
Mm.
And that's kind of when I was able to see where my physical self was. Not me particularly in detail, but I remember very vividly seeing the hospital and people and moving around, but it appeared in color and grayscale. And again, at the time, it was just me observing this. I didn't really have much understanding. It's all sort of come in hindsight. But everything that was real, that had the frequency of love,
Mhm.
was bright and glowing, and everything that was absent of it was grayscale. So, like the building, the cars, they were just grayed out, whereas beings moving around had this radiance, this color and this
Mhm.
energy. And I think that's when it was kind of, again, in hindsight, it wasn't in the moment, but, coming out of it, it was like, this is the duality that we live in. And
Mm.
I kind of knew all of this at the time, but I've had to work backwards from it. And it just, yeah, it's just this all knowing of what this was all about. And I just remember thinking, okay, yeah, 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 good. And I don't know any idea how long I was there or really what was going on, because it was more of a suspension, if you like. It was just being held in that frequency, in that space. And it was just me observing sort of back down to this reality dimension. Then I just remember hearing the words, and I still don't know if it was my voice or whether it was a different voice, but it certainly sounded like something I would say. And that was, you've got too much shit to do. And then the next words were definitely not my own. They were through the speaker in the MRI that said, okay, Ritchie, we're pulling you out now. And I was back and I was like, everything's going to be fine. I'm not sure what's happened, but I was like, everything's going to be fine.
Wow. So you came
And
back, so you come back out of this. So I'm sure they're going to continue to love you because at this point you already thought everything was going to be fine. Now you just have this experience that
yeah,
that pretty much, gave you insight that because you were gone. Some people are actually told specifics, like you have two children
yeah,
to birth. Some people are told you have a lot of work to do. Some people, I like
yeah,
how yours was given to you. It's pretty funny, almost in a way humorous, because it
yeah,
was like you got too much stuff to do kind of thing. So you got to go back. But this is what's interesting, when the NDErs come back, because the experience is real to you, the
yeah,
experiencer,
yeah,
um, you know for 100% fact that you're gonna be fine because you were sent back. Like there's this feeling of, oh, I was going into this place
mm,
and now I'm coming back. Like there's no question now. Everything's gonna be fine. I'm gonna be
yeah,
fine because I would have kept going had right. And this is what I mean. So,
yeah, yeah,
but you try to come
yeah,
back and explain that to a doctor or something, or they look at you like you have 12 heads, like, hey, like
yeah,
that's a nice dream you had, but
yeah, yeah,
you're still in a bad place. So I wanted to ask you quickly before you go into further what happened after that, but was the place that you were in, did it feel familiar?
yeah, yeah. There was no doubt about that, because it was all encompassing. It was like, again, I can't do really better than saying it was absolutely nothing but contained everything. So there was never any question. There wasn't, I guess what I'm saying is there wasn't the contrast to appreciate it in either direction. It was all just one. it was only the vision from that oneness where I was able to see the contrast and see the duality
Hmm.
that, again, I remember witnessing it, but not being like, oh, now I get it. It was like I remember witnessing it. And then after coming away from it, thinking about it consciously, meditating on it and going, this is what this was duality. So it's, and I'll be honest, I don't know if it might be different for other people, but I thought, like, after that, everything's fine, everything's sorted. But I've had to work really hard to understand that because every day is a day further away from that experience.
Hmm.
So I have to really sort of, and I think I was so present at the time, and I don't know whether it was withheld from me because it would take some energy that needed for healing. I don't know, but I've learned more in hindsight and sitting with it. It was clearly there because I'd experienced it, but it wasn't sort of like me going, "Oh yeah, you're thinking about it," because in the oneness there isn't that sort of curiosity because there isn't that contrast. You can't think
Hmm.
about right or wrong or this or that. It's not. You're just in oneness.
Wow.
So
Hmm.
it's in hindsight that I've sort of raised a question that and sat in that question and meditated on it to get the answers to really understand it in this, to be able to talk about it like this. I didn't have the words for it. I couldn't have, it was just an experience that was like, wow. And that knowing of like, whatever just happened was magic,
Hmm. And it
which it
was
proved to be.
and it was beyond what you're used to in this physical. The thing that always So here's a question because I always try to ask
Oh,
questions for the audience. I try to come from that place. That's what I
sure.
guess selfishly it's coming from me, but I'm always trying to think from their perspective. So
Yeah.
I've had a few NDEers mention this exact thing, that they went into an area or a place that contained nothing but everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
the, there's dark and there's light, and there's
Mm,
different contrast to things in life, but I'm like, how can nothing be everything? And then at
yeah.
the same time, when I think of nothing, because life is filled of everything, like it's busy, it's like almost
Yeah.
annoyingly busy at times, right? You're just like trying to find that time for yourself. So you don't have
Yeah.
time for nothing, really. So the idea of nothing can be actually quite frightening if it's nothing.
Mm,
But for
yeah.
some reason, and I don't know what you're going to say, but from the people I've spoke with, when I'm like, wasn't that terrible? They're like, no, it was amazing. You're like, wait,
Yeah.
nothing to me
Yeah.
sounds scary. So is it hard to
Yeah.
describe in just human words to give the expression of what that felt like? Or I'm just wondering if you can dig
Yeah,
into that
it
anymore.
is very difficult. I mean, I suppose the closest I get is the nothingness that contained everything, but it's kind of like a suspension of just being held there, you know? It's kind of like just floating in water. If you're not moving, you're not
Hmm.
going here, you're not going there, you're not swimming from A to B, you're just floating, you're just there, and it's that wholeness, that contentment. And although you say like, this reality is full of stuff, but when you start to look, there's a space between everything. I mean, physicists talk about, dark matter. Don't know what it is. It's nothing, but it seems to contain a lot of information. And
Mm.
it's that the invisibleness, the nothingness that makes the seed grow. We can't
Mm.
pinpoint it, but it's there.
Right,
But we're
right.
just so unaccustomed to it. And I think anybody who's meditated a lot, I think they would resonate with that resonance of
Hmm.
that suspension of where everything just settles and it's not dynamic. It's just being there. It's the divine feminine, I suppose, if you like,
Hmm.
with that passive energy rather than this divine masculine of doing and the dynamics of the energy. That's very much those are the two contrasts, but it's definitely towards the other where it's just that suspension, but far from terrifying or concerning or
Okay.
doubtful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the closest that I can come to it is I had someone lead me through a meditation a couple of years ago, and it was a normal meditative type thing. I
Mm,
always find when people lead me through meditation, it's easier for, I have a very busy mind. That's why I'm a writer.
hmm.
I
Yeah,
just find that if someone's leading me, it helps me. And all of a sudden, at one point, I was suspended visually in clouds, but they were purple, and the sky was kind of purple. And I remember just kind of being aware of this, not feeling
yeah,
like I was not here. I wasn't here. Like I don't know where
yeah,
I was. And I
yeah,
was suspended and I just sat there and it was unbelievably gratifying. It was
yeah,
and I didn't do anything. And I remember I came back from that and been like, I was kind of like, what was that? Like, was that a dream? Was I in between that dream state? Like, what was that? But I
mm,
remember the feeling of it felt very just calm, and I could have stayed there pretty much forever.
yeah.
Probably would have got bored after some time. Maybe that's why we incarnate. I have no idea, but I don't know what
Ah,
that was,
I
and I'm
think that's
wondering
a
if
human construct.
right, yeah, right. So
Yeah,
that's what I
yeah,
mean because like
yeah,
we're online here, right? So unless
yeah.
you're offline, and it sounds like you definitely went offline and you went somewhere
Mm.
different. Did it feel as real as this, as you and I talking?
Um, yeah, that's a tricky one because intuitively, I'd say that was more real
Okay, I get that too.
than this. That's the which again why it's so hard because you're talking about a nothingness that apparently is more real than this construction of whatever.
Hmm.
So it's yeah, I don't think I've got the words to answer that
That's
quite
okay. I wanted
rightly
to, I
yet
just,
because
mhm.
it is very difficult to use the language we use to describe this duality, this contrast we live in is abundant, but to talk about the other, we don't quite have the accurate description because it just is what it is.
Mhm.
It's none of those, and that's why it made me laugh when you said, oh, perhaps I'd get bored there, and I'm like, that's a contrast. The human, it's
Mm.
that again. It's not even I don't know possible on the radar and understandable, but it wasn't. It's as if those elements didn't even exist in that space and time.
Right. One of the most difficult things I find when I'm interviewing NDErs is um, and they do a great job at describing, but I can find there's times where it's very difficult to describe the experience. They do it the
Mm,
best they can, but because it's a different, I think I'm just, this is my own assumption. I feel because it is a different form of who we are, a different form of our own reality, we're trying to
mm,
describe a different form of reality in our current reality, which
exactly.
is a
Yeah.
difficult thing to do. Like people will say, "Oh, there's all these colors." I'm like, "What color was it?" They're like, I don't know, but there's these different colors."
Yeah.
Or they're like, maybe bluish with a hint, and they're trying to describe it, but they can't quite describe it because it's not
Yeah.
in our current situation here.
No.
You've had dreams obviously in your life. Did it feel dreamlike or more than that too? I mean, you said it felt more real than here, so I'm assuming it didn't feel like a dream.
Dreamlike states feel closer to this. You could call it, a dream in the sense that, you're not physically playing something out, but I'd say, dreams are sort of the esoteric story of this.
Right.
There was just oneness,
Hmm.
you know. I couldn't say it was either awake or asleep to be able to dream. Just was.
I wanted to dig in a little bit when you came back. I think it was on your way back from being in this other
Yeah.
realm. You saw energies, you saw people moving around, and you saw the light within them or colors, but everything else was grayed out. I wanted to know if you could dig into that a
Yeah.
little more.
Sure. Yeah. It was just from that source energy when I had the vision, if you like, playing out in front of me of what was going on, let's say below me for description's sake, this is where I could see the contrast. And that's how it was being shown to me was there was love and there was non-love. There was love and an absence of love. And love has a high frequency. And I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about love as source energy as the highest possible frequency. And that has a vibration, a frequency. It had movement to it. The the more solid matter, should we say, of the car and the hospital were just grayscaled as they appeared. So it was, I could see movement in going on still within the grayscale, but nowhere near the frequency of what I was seeing with what you'd say real people, going about their lives or whatever. It was a complete sort of contrast of the two, which was the duality that we live in. It's that polarity of positive, negative, light or dark, that sort of thing. And I think that's how it was shown to me. So that I think that's what I needed to see to understand that you're here for this contrast, and it's that balance between that and the resonance of love. And are you living in love, or are you living out of love as a frequency? And I think I saw that my illness was the absence of love for myself and
Oh,
my
okay.
experience. Yeah, and that's really what I understood. And I think that's, in hindsight, I knew that's what I needed to do to heal and survive. Was it was
Mhm.
like I needed to bring in that frequency of love into the areas where it didn't, I wasn't allowing it.
Yeah, that was kind of where I was leading with this, because if you were seeing this duality of love versus non-love, or as you were saying, buildings, cars, things like that were grayed out. So the, you know, I've always said it's the same thing where if I go away on a trip and I'm in nature, I feel so much better. Once I come back into the city and I see the busyness and the cars and the
Yeah,
buildings and everything, there's this it's just a little more difficult to take in. It's like a
yeah,
heaviness
yeah,
that comes along with it.
yes,
So I can
yeah, yeah,
understand. So I'm picking up on the same thing, but from within these four walls, if you
yeah,
will.
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
you were outside looking at it and seeing it really from its
yeah.
entire essence. Now, when you came back, I'm curious, in knowing, getting the knowledge now that you obviously survived beyond whatever, you know, this Ritchie body is, and you've
Yeah.
you've survived beyond that, and you're somewhere else, and you come back and you've seen love versus non-love and these things. What was it that you took on? Like, how did you approach your healing journey? I'm wondering if you could dig into that a little bit.
Again, it was this sort of coming back with this knowing and understanding. I remember my partner took me out to the MRI part of the building, and then we just sat outside, and it was the middle of summer, and everything was so vivid and bright, and it was like that energy was still, excuse me, was still resonating through everything, and it was like, oh my God, it was a bit of the sense of when you've like come out of a really, say, a good movie or something that's been really enlightening, and then you're suddenly like, and you're in that vibration.
Mhm.
And it was again that knowing of like, this is going to be all right. This is going to be all right. Everything's beautiful. Everything's amazing. And it was just like,
Right.
yeah, I was just in this like childlike wonder of just, I remember
Yeah.
looking at the sun and the tree and being like, wow, yeah.
So it sounded like you
Um,
were kind of on like mushrooms or something. The
oh,
sense of
yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
right? Because people get these kind of like these euphoric kind of
Yeah, yeah,
moments.
yeah.
I had
There's
someone tell me
probably
one time they seen fruit in a grocery store and they were on mushrooms, and they just sat there in love with the fruit, and people were wondering what they
yeah.
were doing, but they were connecting
Yes.
with pureness of the earth or something. The
Yeah,
way you
yeah.
described that, it just sort of cut you off there, but it just
Mm.
it reminded me of that, even though I'm not telling everyone to go do psychedelics, but it has the same, it seems like you came back with almost the same kind of reaction, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree. It was seeing everything in detail, energetically, the colors, everything was just so much brighter. And yeah, it was amazing, really, because it was a whole new perspective. I think that was the thing.
Mhm.
I had to take that journey back to source to, let's say, remember or understand. Um, and it was a critical part of the journey. So when I came back from that perspective, this obviously looked very, very different because I
Hmm.
was looking through completely different lens. It was like as if somebody had cleaned the lens. You put on the glasses, and you're like, "Oh yeah, wow! Is that really the color of that tree? Wow!" It was that
Right.
sort of vividness.
Wow.
And I think I was just in a bit of a yeah, potentially mushroom like stage. Yeah,
It
I'd
may
take that. Yeah,
it makes me wonder if children, when they're born, like I have a 2-year-old, I sometimes wonder when babies are younger, they're closer to not, they haven't been here too long.
yeah,
If they are seeing life more
yeah,
like that as children, that's why we're more like fluffy and
yeah.
everything's more lively. I was making the hair on my arms go up because I feel usually
Totally.
I've been told when I get that it's a truth. So
Yes.
it's kind of like are they, and the longer we're here, it's the same thing you said at the beginning of this conversation that you're now dealing with the idea of you're kind of getting further and further away from your experience, which kind
Yeah.
of brings you more into the human, which is kind of a pain, right? Because you want to
Yeah.
keep a
Yeah.
hold of that experience and share that with the
Yes.
world. So I can understand what you're saying now. And
Yeah.
in that moment, you got to see all this color again, the way that it
Yeah.
likely is meant to be seen.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the baby is a perfect example of that.
Mhm.
When a baby's content and they're just lying there and they're just looking into nothingness,
Mhm.
doing nothing.
Right.
I tell you, actually, it's just come to me. They're just being, and this was the problem. This was the duality that I was really shown. I was doing a lot, but I wasn't being enough.
Mhm.
And when you look at the baby, as I'm sure you recently experienced, they're just being, and they're looking around, making cute noises, just in nothingness, just being there. And that is probably the best analogy I could give to anybody is being. And I think that was we're human beings, not human doings, as somebody's
Mhm.
famously quoted. And I think that is exactly right about babies. They're very good at just being in that energy. And then as we grow up, we start doing and doing because we've been conditioned
Mhm.
to do. And then you reach a certain point of adulthood, and then you go, "Oh, I'm sick of doing stuff now." You like try
Yeah.
and reverse it all.
You clearly went through a healing journey after that, and I don't know if
Yeah,
it was a mix of the natural and the medicinal, like medical approach. I'm assuming
yeah, yeah.
probably a little bit of both, but you can clear that up. But I was wondering if you could, just for the audience, give them any kind of takeaway of how to be more in being and not doing.
Mm,
Like, what are the things that you do now that have kind of helped you heal?
yeah. Well, it's, it's a very long answer to what I've done to heal, but in sense of being is getting in touch with that present consciousness, learning, practicing once more. We all know how to be, but we've practiced so much doing that we've moved away from that. It's like when I talk about source energy, we all come from source energy. It's just we don't remember it. And as you say with a baby, we move further and further away. We're not losing a connection to source. We're just putting so much stuff in the way that it seems so much more in the distance than it is. And I think I needed that experience of source as a bit of a refresher,
Mm.
whereas the baby's much closer to that experience of coming from source. And it's in all of us. And I think people, when they start to meditate, they can find that space, but it's available to everybody. And it is really in the nothing, the sitting in nature, the meditating without a goal, rather than
Mm.
I've got to achieve this, I've got to do, just be there, just sit there and just be there. We get very caught up on still attempting to be, but still doing, you know?
Wow.
And they both exist, it's the yin and the yang and all the rest of it. So you can find being while you're painting, or maybe when you're singing, you can find that presence. It's a state of being, and there
Mhm.
are many avenues to that state. but true being is that nothingness. Maybe music will take you into that state of being, and then suddenly you're like, oh, what was I just singing? What was I just playing? And you kind of lose it all because you've reached that state of being. But
Mm,
music is the transition into that.
yes.
And many
Yeah.
people have whatever it is that helps them transition to that. But it's that, oh, what happened? Because it was
Mhm.
nothingness.
Yeah.
It was just being there in
Yeah.
that space, time, and energy.
The closest I can come to that isn't the performing of music myself. It's in
Yeah.
the writing process. It's when I'm in that deep state late in the evening where my mind is just calmed
Mm,
down and I just start playing chords and I start singing. And I come out and I go, did I just write a song? That's the closest I can
yeah.
relate to the way you're describing. So people out there likely have these things, whether it's painting, walking in nature, meditating. I like you said, meditating without a goal.
Yeah.
That's really good stuff because I think a lot of us tend to have these, oh, it's my 10 minutes. I've got to get my meditation in. Well, now you've got this goal to have a 10-minute
Yeah.
quick
Yeah.
meditation. So that's the
Yeah.
challenge, right? Is finding the
Yeah.
true uh time to just be.
Yeah.
Did you at that point when you came back, I'm assuming it wasn't just a miracle you walked out and went, okay, this is what I got to do, or was it?
No.
And what did you do at that point?
Yeah. Well, I didn't really know, but I'd come back with, I suppose, a deeper surrender that it was that I just completely surrendered and was like, okay,
Mm,
I'm not going to do anything particular. I'm going to just be in this energy now and allow things to unfold as they need to unfold. And it was a complete state of surrender, not giving up surrender, just as in I surrender to the universe. Okay. If that's where I've come from, then I could quite happily go back there. There's no problem with that. But I'm also happy to stay here and do whatever it is that I need to do. And there wasn't a plan or anything specific other than the game changer really was when the doctor came back in with the MRI results and confirmed that the cancer hadn't spread through my brain and my spine. Whether that was the case before I went in
mm,
or after, I will never ever be able to know.
mm,
But the point was his prognosis of that this was my final days and there was no way we could get it back
mhm.
from the brain or the spine proved not to be the case. And I was like, I told you I'd be fine. I was like, this is, and he was like, well, there's still nothing we can do because you're too sick. You're not strong enough to receive any treatment. Um, and that was kind of his thing.
Mhm.
Um, but then I started to get well. And the palliative care, which was just to keep us out of pain, it's quite common with people with serious illness. Actually, well, I say it did start, it must have started to work because I started to get better. I started to get stronger. Um, my body was covered in tumors and the obvious sort of things. And I just started to feel better. I started to feel stronger. My blood results started to improve. And that's when we started to have conversations about, okay, if I've surrendered to the universe, I'm in this hospital. I've exhausted all my possibilities. I'm still working, with my energy healer. I've got all my therapy tools and everything going on. The only thing I'm being presented with is a doctor who said potentially we could slowly start to introduce a little bit of treatment that could be supportive, but you're not strong enough. And I went, leave it with me, then I'll get strong enough. And I started to get stronger and my blood results got better. And I worked with my own energy healer who at one time doubled my blood results overnight. They came back and did them 3 more times and they improved. So we believed then, I thought, right, well, the universe is actually saying, here you are. The only thing that's available to you is this treatment that could potentially help you.
Mhm.
Then I went, well, this is clearly what the universe wants me to do. And I
Mhm.
believe firmly that I was put in that scenario because of me being so extreme about the natural that it actually gave me this opportunity to bring about the balance. to
Mhm.
understand the duality of, if I'm too far in either of the sides, then potentially, well, there's no balance. That's not equilibrium.
Right.
So we then took I took an integrated approach, because he asked me to stop everything that I was doing if he was going to introduce his treatment.
Mm.
I questioned whose treatment we were talking about.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
and I blatantly said, "What is it you need to hear me say?" And he went, "I want to hear you say you won't do any of your stuff." And I went, "Okay." I said, "You can hear me say I won't do any of my stuff." But of course I did.
Right. Right.
I had my partner bringing in ozonated water. He was bringing smoothies. I was doing everything, absolutely everything. I just
Right.
kept it on the down low. It was just, I wouldn't eat the hospital food. He was bringing all my food in. So it was an integrated approach. And I just started to get better and better. And then ultimately, 6 months later, I left hospital. Um, Still unable to walk. I'd lost a lot of muscle. My nerves weren't firing properly. But I got the all clear just before Christmas at the end of the year, without any secondary issues, without any evidence of me ever having anything other than the fact that I was, still presenting as a sick person, because I physically got to restore myself. But the treatment didn't damage me. Even the chemotherapy is well known for. Well, he actually told me, he said, "We'll do the last scan." He went, "And if it is the all clear," he said, "you can still expect at least 20 secondary issues." And I went into that consultation, and he said, "There's absolutely nothing." He said,
Mm.
"There's no evidence of anything."
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing.
So
And
it was a
yeah,
joint effort. And I
it
will give him
is.
credit for that.
I feel like you also though came back with because of what you experienced, and it's really, yeah, I've said this many times. I don't necessarily want an NDE at all, and I don't think a lot of people do. But in a sense, it's a gift because you were able to kind of witness where you came from, where we go, that type of
Yeah,
feeling. You were able to witness who you are truly in your in your essence of who you are.
yeah,
So the fear no longer was there to keep just pushing the fear. Well, maybe it was there, but it probably wasn't nearly where it was before the experience. And see, where I'm fascinated about things is, and I appreciate your approach to this and you sharing this story because there's plenty of NDE stories out there too that people do come back and they do just heal on their own. They don't need those
mm,
extra drugs and things like that. And then there's people who go completely the drug route and they heal, but usually then later they have to find ways to preventatively stay healed. Uh,
yeah,
so
yeah,
yours is kind of a mix. Yours is kind of you did both. You took
yeah,
the medical route and the natural route.
mm,
Um, I guess the real deep question is, I wonder what would have happened had you just gone the natural route. I'm curious myself.
yeah,
Had you stayed
yeah,
with that? Not that I would encourage it to anybody, but it's interesting, right? Because it sounded like the point that I was trying to make is that I felt like you had come back and just really just started listening to what your gut was saying to do. And I look
absolutely.
at the whole picture of humankind and the fact that we have all these medical treatments and we have all these things. I mean, there's a reason for those. Whether some of
Yeah,
them are pushed, everything can be pushed over the top in every industry,
yeah,
right? But there's a
yeah,
reason why they were developed in the first place. So I think we have to be aware
yeah,
of those things. If you look
yeah,
back, do you feel like you are still happy with the way that things went, the way that you trusted yourself and
yeah. Because I took it all as information and all as learning, and I think with what I understand and know now, I do believe that I could have done it without any mainstream medical intervention,
Mhm.
but my belief and understanding wasn't there at that point.
Mm,
And I needed to have that dual experience. I needed that contrast, as I'd been shown from source, to fully heal and understand that I needed to heal on every single level. And I think it was the power of surrender that said, as I do with everything in life now, right, what opportunities are available in front of me right now? And it was like, I'm in hospital, I'm in a safe place, I can be monitored by medical people, I can still do my stuff, and we can slowly introduce something that might work. Now, I don't doubt that that did something, but if I had, I guess the answer is, if I believed chemo was going to kill me as it did, as I believed at the start, it would have done exactly that. But
Hmm.
I'd reached a point of surrender where I went, the universe is presenting me with this opportunity, so I'm going to trust and surrender and know that it's part of the equation, whether I needed that just as a placebo or whether I needed that as a physical treatment. But I knew that it would work on a physical level. And I got my physical level with the doctors, I got my mental level with myself, my emotional, energetic level working with colleagues in the energy field. I'd had a spiritual experience. I was like, this is all bases. But if I start denying some of those, then I'm not going to completely heal. And I think this is why we see reoccurring illness all the time, because the doctor might cut it out. You might work with a psychologist and get over that process, but what about the emotional and energetic? What about the spiritual scar that it leaves, etc.? So I knew I needed the whole. I know I needed to experience the contrast because that's how we all learn.
Hmm.
And if I was in balance of that contrast, I wouldn't have had to take either extreme. So what happened in the process of healing, everything came into balance and I had an experience of everything and I came out with a complete healing.
That's
And
amazing.
so
Yeah.
I do firmly believe the universe, if you surrender, might not be the option you want. It wasn't the option I wanted, but
Right.
I said to the universe, I surrender, show me the way. And that was what was available to me at the time. And I said, okay, I trust you.
Yeah, it really speaks volumes on our beliefs and
Mm,
the affirmations we're making to ourselves, right? Because like you said,
absolutely.
you at some point you must have thought, okay, I believe the combination of the both are going to help me. And you already had the belief that you were going to be okay. So all that kind of came together. But you're right.
Yeah.
Had you believed that it was going to kill you taking this medication, then maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you should let
Yeah.
yourself get to
Yeah.
that point, right? So, um, it really does speak to that. And I think that's huge. And some of us have that belief in us or that willpower of belief a little better than others. And that's where,
Yeah.
medical intervention can really help because it might at least get us to a point where our beliefs can kind of turn online and we can kind of go in that direction. So that's great. Wow. You,
Yeah. But
I'm
but
sorry.
also I'd love to add because I think
Yeah.
it's really significant for anybody that's facing this as a possibility. It is absolutely your choice and your belief is always going to determine the outcome. Always. But when treatment was introduced, I didn't take it passively. Every time they hooked me up to a bag of chemo, I meditated with the bag of chemo and I told it exactly what it needed to do.
Mm.
And I sat with it and I went through it in my mind and I welcomed it. I thanked it. I gave gratitude for this. And I was like, right, everything that's healthy, please stand to one side, let the chemotherapy come through and do what it needs to do and protect everything else. And I used to guide it through my body. And I think that in itself for me, as a bit of a control freak, gave me a bit more of a reassurance because I thought I could bring consciousness to this as we can anything, you know, and it's having that conscious belief system because it's the unconscious belief systems are really what do the damage, I think. And
I think this speaks volumes on how we're much bigger than we think we are. That's what I get from all
oh
this.
god, yeah.
It's almost like we have
Yeah,
our physical body, but then there's the energy body, and the energy body I think is in way more control than the physical. And so as
mm,
much we can be eating as healthy as we want, we can be doing all these different things, but if our beliefs and our outcomes that we see are negative in
yeah,
nature or are dark and they're going in these bad directions that we don't want, then we're actually attracting that thing that we don't want. So
yeah,
it sounds like you had a whole holistic approach. I still see it as holistic medicine. I still see that as because you're
absolutely, yeah,
you're tuning into your higher self in a sense, right? So
yeah,
um
yeah, yeah.
do you speaking in with I wanted to go over a little bit. You do therapy. Do you work with people, individuals, or how does that work out?
Yeah, yeah, I do. But my practice has changed slightly because now I work from a different perspective. And it was a mentor of mine actually said to me, and this is where it started to really set in, was you can only when you're working with somebody, you can only take them as far as you've been. And he
Mm.
went, I want you to stop and think about how far you've been. And then I started to realize that whilst we're all connected to source, I just got a kind of fresher memory of it. So when I work with somebody now, I'm very open about it, that I open to source energy with the client, reminding them, making them more familiar with that. So I couldn't stick with just old therapeutic models anymore, because now when we open to that energy, it's not me that's healing. I'm opening to that energy and the person is healing themselves. So
Mhm.
it's taken on something I'd never expected, because it's not tangible and I haven't got a method or a process,
Mhm.
but we open to this energy because I remember it acutely. We can open that space. I can help you remember. And it's in that space that's where the healing really takes place. And of course, I use that model of my experience, healing it physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically, spiritually, because that gives us a complete healing. We're hardwired to heal. It's
Yeah.
all the other stuff that blocks that healing. If you think of us as an electrical system, it's like the wires are all connected, the system works fine. It's like then you start adding this in, a bit of trash here and a bit of that there. And then eventually it's like, the dust starts to build and then the system isn't working as efficiently. But when you start to open back into that space, just to the source of what we all are, and anybody could do that, but I think having the experience at this stage in life now enables me to simply sit in that space with clients. We have a chat, we breathe together, we drop into meditation, and then I just watch miracles take place. To be brutally frank, stuff that I don't fully understand yet,
Yeah.
um, and I'm still understanding. And yeah,
That's
it's it's
amazing.
it's it's something else.
How,
It really is.
how do people get in contact with you? Do you have a website, or do you have a way that just
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah,
if
absolutely.
you do this online or anything like that. I just didn't know.
Yeah, no, I'm available online. I suppose the forefront of that, people like Instagram these days. Yeah, but
Hmm.
across the board, it's heal the void within.
And is that a website, healthevoidwithin.com
That's
or
uh, not as yet, but that's the Instagram handle that you can get
okay.
me through there, and then you can get onto from the link in the bio. You can get onto everything else from there, the website and so forth. But that's kind of the I don't. I'm steering away from calling it a program, but like
Hmm.
I now prefer to have a mentoring relationship with somebody. I can't call it a program because we never know where it's going to go. We
Right.
open the space, and whatever needs to be dealt with is dealt with, even if they think it's relevant or not. I don't lead it. I've tried to write programs for people before, but that's my idea of how things should be.
Hmm.
So now it's called Heal the Void Within, and it's a mentoring relationship over a brief period of time that just helps people to cleanse and clear out the crap and start to look at who am I when I don't have all that crap,
Yeah.
because that's when you start to see that that void within isn't really a
Hmm.
void or a space at all. It's just we're looking in the wrong direction. That nothingness is actually full of a lot of interesting experiences and energy.
That's the difficult thing. I think I look at it like a layering effect. Like there's us, and then there's these layers of who we really aren't, and we're always trying to get back down to who we really are at our core. And these
Yeah,
layers of
yeah,
junk that we have to remove to
yeah.
get there. I'm very I see things when people describe things. So when you're talking, I'm just seeing this
Mm,
like core of who we are and layers
yeah,
that we have to peel off. And it's hard
yeah,
sometimes to do that on your own. So working with somebody like yourself, I always like to find out how people get in contact because the guests come on and then there's some people out there that will resonate with certain people and want to reach out, right? So I appreciate you giving me that
sure.
info.
No,
Um,
please do. I'd love to.
this
Well, I like
this
to
is
talk, as you can gather. So
yeah, no,
yeah,
and I've loved this. I feel like
please
I could go for another
do
two
reach
hours.
out. Yeah.
I generally end each talk with the same question. I'm really curious about your answer to this because you had a very interesting near-death experience. You weren't over on the other side, having a picnic and seeing a waterfall or anything like that. You kind of went directly
No.
to source, and that's not
Yeah.
to take away. I think it's amazing that people have so many different experiences in what they mean to them.
Mm,
But the last question I always end the conversation with is if you were to look at not just yourself, but us in general as
mm,
human beings, What do you
Yeah.
believe is the main reason we incarnate here and come here? Like, what is our general reasoning for even doing this meat suit?
Yeah, it's growth. It's we come to the Earth School to learn in contrast, to experience this duality, because that's how we learn and understand. It's appreciating daylight because we have nighttime. It's
Wow.
appreciating the well, we just get into labels, but you get the point, and it's not binary. Everything's a spectrum. Where does daylight end and night begin? It's not. It's a sliding spectrum, just like we're now starting to understand in gender, sexuality, and all the other. This is all spectrum. However, that's the experience here, and that's what this school, university, college is about: is learning from that contrast. Whereas in
Mhm.
the nothingness, it's whole, it's complete. So I think as souls, we want to come down here because we're like we want to experience that contrast. Like, let me know what it feels like to do that, and we're excited to do so. And I think that many other spiritual teachers talk about it very often. About this isn't like kindergarten, as you would call it, or nursery school. This is like doing your PhD. You know,
Mhm.
we it's hard, and we this is our contrast. We have the polarity of positive and negative and everything in between. So I think we come for that very lesson with excitement at the time, and then we get here and go, what have we done? Why are we
Yeah,
here? But
why why
yeah,
did I
why did
sign
I
up?
choose this? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
that's what
Yeah.
I would say from my experience and intuition is
To
simply that.
experience this growth. I hear that
Yeah.
idea of it being an earth school. I even digging even deeper with that, I do believe there's something to do with the way our souls are created or the way that we are as energy and the growth that
Mm,
the growth that we get here and how it can affect us from a soul perspective. I do believe there's different dimensions and planes of existence because,
absolutely. Yeah.
everyone's experience is yours was very just this thing, but there's all these other things I hear. So I'm collecting all this
Yeah.
data
Yeah.
and going, okay,
Yeah.
not everyone's just having that same place. So where else do we go? What else do we do? And I
Yeah.
think it's expansive. I think it's so big that we can't wrap our heads around it. That's why a lot of people come back and they're like,
Exactly.
I was told everything, but I can't tell you what those things were because it's
Yeah.
bigger than what we understand. That
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So you resonate with that too?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like we're this school learning this subject right now, but there's many others that are
Right.
out there that we've yet to go to, or maybe we've already come from. Maybe we found that another one boring, for example, and thought, no, we're going to Earth. That's
Right.
that's where it's at. Who knows? But it all. If we can perceive it even just a little bit, then it exists.
Wow. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on, Richie. This has
Pleasure. No,
been
thank you.
such a
Really
good
appreciate it.
conversation. I always go to the camera and just say to my audience to say, please like, share, and subscribe. Continue to share the Soul Inspired as we get these kind of messages out, and we get amazing, beautiful souls like Richie on that can give us insight into how to heal, how to live, and all those great things. So thank you so much, Richie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So